Welcome to episode 327 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Catlett.
You know what? We're just going to assume it records. Hello, Mr. Bell. How are you, sir?
I am doing much better than a certain Amazon data center.
So goes US East 1, so goes the world.
Yes, and apparently so goes Riverside.
Yeah, just a little context for those curious what we're talking about. We're attempting to record during a big AWS outage, and our podcast production studio software apparently runs in AWS, and it is ailing a tad. But we're here.
It's having issues. It's having some issues.
So at the end result of whatever comes out the other end of this sausage maker, if it's a little bumpy and disjointed and edited, blame AWS and Jerry.
That's right. Or just blame AWS anyway. Like there's no harm in that.
Anyway.
All right. So a quick reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and not those of our employers. Also a continued deep and heartfelt thank you to our Patreon sponsors. Thank you very, very much. You are amazing. And if you would like to be one, you can do so by going to our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/defensivesec. And if you do sign up, you will get our wonderful magical episodes a week early, or at least a week earlier than everybody else. So we think that's pretty darn cool.
And, we really do love our patrons. Jerry, a little too much. I've talked to him about showing up in people's backyards without permission. He understands.
I mean, look, I take it seriously, very much appreciate them. Just sometimes a little too much.
A little too much, but your heart's in the right place.
That's right. And also, I just want to continue plugging our YouTube site. If you go to YouTube and search for Defensive Security Podcast, we would absolutely love it, love it, if you follow our channel there. And we do post some interesting stuff that is a little outside of the podcast. Like I went on a couple beach chair rants recently.
Now, are those rants about beach chairs?
No, but that would be a good idea for next time. There were rants while I was in the beach chair.
Which obviously, sitting on the beach of the Gulf of Mexico or America, however you prefer it these days, while drinking Mai Tais does seem very rant-inducing to you. So you should probably talk to somebody about that.
Everybody has their hot buttons, right? Mine is just a little different.
That's fair. But they're anyway, come check out the YouTube channel. We have shorts, which is what Jerry's talking about. I usually grab some snippets from our shows that I think are clever, interesting little 1 to 2 minute shorts. We're trying to be hip with the kids today and their short attention spans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we haven't figured out the whole Minecraft video thing in the background yet, but we'll work on that.
It's true.
All right. So let's go ahead and get into our stories for today. The first one comes from Cyber Insiders, which is a new site to me. The title here is How AI Will Shape the Future of Cyber Defense, a 1, 2, 3, and 5 year outlook. Look, there's a lot to be said about AI. There's a lot of opinions about its efficacy and whether it's a waste and if it's a bubble and if it's a fad and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is it's kind of here, and I don't think it's going away. You could say that, are we in a bubble? And I would say, I think probably yes. But that, we were in a cloud bubble. We were in a .com bubble. Like, we've had bubbles before, and we still have the internet. We still have the cloud. They aren't mutually exclusive. And so I think it makes sense, especially for those people who are going to be in the industry for a while, to make sure they're kind of looking at where things are headed from a lot of perspectives, from training perspective, growth planning and whatnot, as well as from the perspective of of being in a business, being responsible for security in a business, understanding like what is going to, or what is likely to be expected out of you and your function going forward. And so this was an interesting take. I have thoughts on it because that's how I am. Again, as the title would imply, they've broken this article down into like, what they see by the end of 2026, and then what they see by the end of 2028, and then by 2030. I think what they describe is happening by the end of 2026 in large measure, I think, is already partly here. They're describing it human augmented foundation. So basically, the security operations centers that are augmented in some way with AI technology. And I think for a long time, we've had the concept of automation in place, and perhaps AI will make that automation a little snappier, a little more, a little more effective, and perhaps applicable in more places. I don't think it's like a radical departure from where we're at today. And what do you think?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I see a lot of the security tools in the last 12 months have started to stick their feet into AI, right? Almost all of them have some AI overlay or AI in the back end. And I don't think any of this is going to be a straight path, right? I don't think there's going to be a linear from here to there. It's going to be bumpy. There's going to be missteps. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be things that don't work well. But these teams, these various security tool vendors, their product teams, their product engineers, their product managers are going to continue to iterate, and they're going to continue to see what works in the marketplace and what doesn't. And at a more broad view, I really think that we're following the Gartner hype cycle, which if you're not familiar with that, it's, you get this, you should look it up and get the visual, but you have this technology trigger, which in this case is AI and more broadly, this generative AI. And then you get to this peak of inflated expectations. I think we're pretty close to the peak of inflated expectation. Then you get this big fall off into what they call the trough of disillusionment, where it's like, this sucks, it's terrible, it doesn't work. But then you see them climbing out of this trough into what they call the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity, which is, I think, exactly what's going to happen here. This is what typically happens. And I'm not always a huge fan of Gartner, but I think they got this one right, that this is how most technologies evolve. And so you have this massive land rush right now and people rushing into it and trying all these things. And we're going to see what works and doesn't work and evolves and doesn't evolve. So I think in terms of what they think is going to happen, by the end of 2026, where we've got machine learning, correlation, AI assistance agreed, where I think it's a little more interesting is when they talk about a year 3, and I'm just going to jump ahead in the story a little bit, where they call it bot versus bot. And they call it, quoting a little, AI will evolve the security ecosystem from assisted automation to adaptive autonomy, where AI agents will be able to defend digital assets at machine speed without human intervention. This is the phase where bots can throw out bots. What I find really entertaining about this is exactly what the marketing says security AI could do right now. This is the marketing pitch you're hearing right now, and we've been hearing forever. Remember when Cisco was pitching the self-defending network?
Mm-hmm.
And that was
a while
ungodly number of internets ago. So it is kind of funny. So the thing that, and I know we haven't gotten into the rest of the story, but from my notes, just kind of looking further ahead, I do worry about, as AI becomes more autonomous and more offensive system, as well as an offensive system, now I've got this new threat category and attack surface I need to worry about, which is, what if a threat actor tries to take over my fully autonomous defensive AI system that has full control over my entire environment and turns it against me? That's a whole new thing I got to worry about. So now I'm going to need an AI firewall for my AI firewall.
That's right. Well, which is similar to what we need today for our firewalls. It is. I find it interesting that this article also makes a special call out in each of the 3 phases about the significance of deception technology.
I did catch that. That was,
and it's
yeah.
It's very interesting. In the year one, they're basically describing it as kind of what I'll characterize as like pedestrian use of honeypots, but they're seeing it as driving a resurgence in the use of honeypots for the purposes of modeling attack traffic, which you can then use to fold back into the learning. Whereas in year three, they describe, and again, this is quotes, the agents will identify anomalous traffic, simulate fake personas, and launch real-time deception countermeasures, creating entire digital environments that distract or mislead attackers. The concept of cyber decoys matures into AI-generated mirage networks. Believable but artificial targets dynamically spin up in response to live attacks. Sounds like, your CFO is going to end up in a labyrinth at some point because inevitably they're going to be detected as doing something bad. But
well, not only that, but I think about if that's true, and a bad actor knows that's true and they get a vote, can they resource exhaust me or cost me a lot of money by forcing more of these things to spin up?
Yeah.
Whenever there's autonomy or automatic reaction that is known to a threat actor, they can typically get creative in ways to abuse that automatic reaction. That's one thing that always concerns me.
It does sound expensive. And the other thing I'll say is the title of this year three is Bot versus Bot, as you pointed out. And one of the realities is that the adversaries, I think, are, a pretty big jump start on this. And so you get into problems. This is already a problem with like existing honeypots. And that is, the ability for the attackers to detect that they are in fact in a honeypot. And so like it becomes this arms race. And you bring up a really great point about the cost, because the average company's cloud bill these days is pretty bad, to the point where we have a lot of companies starting to talk about repatriating their workloads into their own data centers to cut down on costs. And, the prospect of spinning up an entire digital twin, as they describe it, of your real environment for a number of copies to occupy different attackers sounds like it could get really expensive. It's a fascinating thought experiment for sure. And I don't want to poo-poo on that too much at all. I'm not sure that at least in this time frame where we would see that, I guess, is where I'm at. I think that like in concept, the ability to watch the happenings, like kind of isolate what an attacker is doing and use that to learn and enhance the capabilities of whatever automation you're building or put in place is a great idea. And so like, I think that makes great sense, but I just don't see on this timeline that working. So yeah. And then the other
thing I think about very briefly is adoption, right? There may be certain vendors. This is sort of implying all SOCs everywhere, table stakes.
That's a good point.
That's
a good point.
We'll see.
So like the most state of the art might be doing this. Fair enough. And then year 5 is, again, by 2030, they're describing it as distributed agentic defenders. And so they're saying that basically people will be out of the security operations business. That's my words, not their words. And the heavy lifting is going to be done by what they describe as agents that are kind of sprinkled across your environment, doing whatever they're programmed or missioned to go do. Again, interesting thought. And this comes back. I am in the middle of studying for the CISM test, and like every other question, the answer to the question is it depends on the needs of your business. And the one like overarching issue I have with this whole discussion, again, which is fascinating, and I think it's worth everybody reading. So, like, I'm not taking away, don't want to take anything away from the author here, but what I think we have to be very cognizant of is that we are the tail on the dog, right? In security, our job is to protect the business's mission, and so what I think that this is really focusing on is taking what we have in place today and just suspending disbelief for a minute and thinking about, like, how could we transform that in an AI future? And, like, if the laws of physics and cost and whatnot were not a problem, like, what could we do? And this makes good sense. But I think the one hard reality that I've learned throughout my career is that we are going to ultimately be responding to what is changing in the business. And so these things are really cool to think about. But what I think is going to be most impactful on how we get to leverage AI and any other technology in the future is, what is business's use of technology going to do? Super simplistic example. If we move away from on-prem applications like wholesale, and now we're all like SaaS based, a lot of this is moot point unless you're a SaaS provider, and so on and so forth. So I don't think that's going to happen, by the way. I'm not proposing that's what's going to happen, but it's an example to say, like, we have to put this in context of, what's going to be happening. And so I think where a lot of the magic, and if you really want to think about how to position yourself in, going into the future, it's helping to, strategy that most efficiently uses technology as the business is evolving. Because I would assume that business's use of IT is going to be accelerating even more rapidly than what we're talking about here, which seems like really kind of crazy fast to me. And so I'm sure that there's a CIO version of this somewhere, and that is the thing that we need to be mapping to.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think the other potential driver, though, is sold as cost savings to staff expense, and that's what drives it.
Yeah,
purely.
Yeah,
but so it's sold to the CFO and the CISO as we can cut your staff expense by half, and all the messiness that comes with deploying people.
Right, and certainly completely agree with that. But I don't know what's going to happen in the future in terms of the business proposition.
Wait, you don't know what's going to happen in the future? Why am I even talking to you? Why are you even on this show?
I don't know. But I have this feeling that a lot of the consumers are thinking about AI, like the AI that's going to end up displacing workers en masse is going to cost hundreds of dollars, while the companies that are offering the AI that's going to displace those workers are thinking about it in terms of wage replacement. Like,
yes,
you are paying this person $200,000 a year, therefore you should be willing to pay us $150,000 per equivalent person that is taken out, and that's where I think there perhaps a bit of a disconnect. And again, I think you can, if we were having this discussion in 10 years or 15 years, I think it's going to probably look similar to the discussion that we've been having about cloud, where, for a long time, people were just rushing to the cloud because it's cheaper and it's easier. And I know that is we're on the upswing of that with AI. But I have to imagine that at some point, we're going to have the same discussion about repatriating at least some things, maybe not everything, but some things to back to people. So anyway, I don't know. This is not my area of predicting the future is not my area of strength. So we'll see.
But I think the key point that you were making that is important is, if you want a career, you've got to watch where AI is going. and try to stay ahead of it. Get to where the puck's going to be and try to make yourself useful. If there are companies out there pitching to replace your role, make sure that you have a useful skill set when that role gets replaced. The tough part is knowing what that skill set is. And I think strategy, soft skills, as much as I hate to say it, I think are going to matter. There's probably going to be less tolerance for brilliant assholes in the AI world, that sort of thing. So anyway.
Yeah. The other thing that strikes me is, sorry to belabor this discussion, but I think kind of like we have been seeing, again, I go back to trying to draw some parallels to cloud. I think we've seen a departure from, I'll just loosely call it like first principles security thinking, where we to some extent, I think we've gotten away from thinking about things like least privilege and a lot of the basics. And I suspect that we're going to see that accelerating again. And I think that being able to translate, let me just say, for some period of time, people are going to be stupid about AI. They're going to be stupid about how they implement AI. They're going to take risks that are just absolutely nutty. But at some point, bad stuff's going to happen, and our risk tolerance for that kind of stuff is going to go down. And at some point, there will be a demand for people who are able to translate like actual first principles security applied to AI-enabled whatevers. So
yes, we want our wisdom bucket to fill before our luck bucket runs out.
That's well said. Very well said. All right. Our next story comes from HelpNet Security. The title here is 5 Data Breach. Nation-state attackers stole big IP source code vulnerability info. I guess, and vulnerability info. So if you haven't been living under a rock, you've probably heard about this. Pretty big story here. There's some nation state is being attributed to this attack. I think, it's, as with everything, it's probably China or maybe it's Iran or North Korea or Russia. Anyway, but that's not the point. But what happened here is that unlike what we're used to with ransomware attacks, some threat actor got into F5 and was apparently there for quite some time, like a year at least, and had been siphoning off their source code. So there's no indications, by the way, and they're very, very clear to point this out. There's no indications that anything was modified, which is good. But one of the challenges is that if you think about a company like F5, whose products are often sitting at the edge, and we have, we're kind of at what I would call one of the, I don't know if it's like the peak or a peak of firewall vulnerabilities, right? We're at that point in the cycle of technology with firewalls where like every freaking day there's some new gnarly vulnerability. Well, those vulnerabilities take time to get fixed, and their code to fix them and information about what the vulnerability is stored internally for some period of time. So as a response to this, F5 released a bunch of patches for their stuff to fix vulnerabilities that were disclosed in their code bases that they believe were stolen.
So
which is good.
It was in the pipeline. It was in the pipeline to get fixed, but it hadn't been deployed yet.
Right, which is good. And even CISA here in the US, despite them not actually working right now or not being paid to work at least, they put out an advisory requiring the US government, who, by the way, is apparently a very large F5 user, to apply those patches imminently. And they also have to create like an inventory of what their F5 devices are and whatnot. And I think the reason for that inventory is what I wanted to talk about next, which is they had access, this threat actor had access for a year. And so I haven't gone back to look at how many vulnerabilities F5 has had over the course of the past year. But you have to think that every time a vulnerability came up in that year time frame, this threat actor had early access to that information. And perhaps the ability to construct exploits. And we know that they're sophisticated because like they were able to somehow break into F5 and remain undetected for over a year, or at least a year. So like that's their MO. And I'm sure that they're not like running off and trying to do mass exploitation of of devices, but if they have specific targets they were going after, that would enable them perhaps to kind of silently break into whoever their target is.
Yeah, F5 being a perimeter device, this has got to be very high priority for nation states who want this sort of 0-day that they can very quietly exploit against very specific targeted accounts. So this is, even if it wasn't the nation state who got the initial access, it probably is very valuable to various hostile nation states or even potentially allied nation states to have this sort of access and be able to do, let's just say, unplanned code audits for. But the key there is then they have to be very careful about how they use them, because to your point, if you use them too broadly, there's a very high likelihood you're going to burn that 0-day and it would get fixed. So, but this has got to be a holy grail to, I think, some intelligence agencies to have this kind of backdoor access into code, undeveloped code, forthcoming code, existing code like this for F5. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, and as we talked about, I think it was last week or the week before, patching doesn't fix a breach. Like if your system had been hacked, and sometimes you don't know that it's been hacked, and you apply a patch, that doesn't mean that either that device isn't still compromised or that something that the device protected is, has been compromised as a result. I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that a lot of F5 customers right now are trying to figure out their threat hunting strategy to figure out like if there were any systems harmed in the making of this security incident. And I do think, by the way, that this is the reason why CISA is requiring a U.S. government, build their inventory list of F5 stuff so that they can start thinking about how they're going to do this. And if I had to guess, like, if it is a nation state, which I'm sure it probably was, like, the U.S. government being one of the larger customers of F5 was almost certainly going to be one of their targets. So makes sense to me why they would want to do that. There was actually something in here that seemed, and I hope I'm reading it right, because if I'm reading it right, I hope this becomes a trend. And that is, it's down kind of buried in the article. I'll just read the quote directly. Finally, F5 is partnering with CrowdStrike to extend Falcon EDR sensors and Overwatch threat hunting to Big IP. An early access version will be available to Big IP customers, and F5 will provide all supported customers with a free Falcon EDR subscription. So, and I'm not trying to like talk up CrowdStrike. What I'm really focused on is the prospect of being able to run some kind of security software on an embedded device like an F5. Like, one of the biggest challenges we have with these devices, whether it's a SonicWall or a F5 or a Cisco or whatever, is like you don't have any insight. If you have a Windows system or a Linux system, you can run a SentinelOne or CrowdStrike or name your agent, and you have some, it's not perfect, right? But you have some ability to see things going bump in the night. You don't have that with most of these devices. So this is if I'm reading this right, that seems huge.
Yeah.
And I hope to see it more.
Yeah, agreed. Very interesting. And something you and I have talked about a lot, that these embedded devices, having some sort of third-party security tooling on there would actually change a lot of the equation. So we'll see. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. Yeah, I still remember having to have my pen test team hack into, I think it was an Array Networks VPN device to figure out if it had been hacked in the wake of a 0-day.
Well, just know, Jerry, you've hacked into my heart.
Your mom.
And it has been exploited.
All right, our next story comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is Fake LastPass and Bitwarden Breach Alerts Lead to PC Hijacks. Now, this is, as far as...
Isn't this the same article we've covered 17?
Maybe. So a couple thoughts. There's nothing like exceptionally novel about this, but what I wanted to focus on is that, you know, we have, and we'll talk about, you know, the prevalence of login driven attacks. You know, when we talk a couple stories from now, it's a big problem, and we've been systematically chipping away at that, you know, by requiring multi-factor authentication and having people use unique passwords on every site and passkeys and whatnot. So at some point, threat actors have to start changing their tactics, because they're not just like, once we've solved the problem of password reuse and we're fully on passkeys, like the threat actors are not going to just like go, well, you know, I guess I have to go get a real job now. They're going to figure out another strategy. And so I think we're starting to see that a little bit here. This is, as far as I can tell, a very like consumer focused attack, sending out a phishing email that is either purporting to be from LastPass or from Bitwarden. It's obviously not. But in both instances, the phishing email is really well written. Like, it's very well written. Obviously, if you look at the sender of the email, you can see that it's fake, but it's, you know, it's prompting the recipient to go and take action as a result of a vulnerability that either LastPass or Bitwarden has become aware of, and that, you know, of course, is to download the latest update, which of course is not actually an update, but rather is in this instance, they're using this. It's called Syncro. It's a little software distribution tool that's used by managed service providers, and they use that to in turn install the Screen Connect remote support software, which then allows the threat actor to connect into your computer and probably actually get into your password manager, which is the grand irony. I think that's where I think when somebody is able to get into your system, like, then are they able to steal your passkeys, or they're able to steal perhaps access to your, you know, your password wallet and whatnot. They do also, later in the article, they talk about a phishing campaign targeting 1Password, which, you know, is, I think 1Password is heavily used by a lot of companies. I mean, it was used by the one that I was with last, and
sure,
rightly so. It's great. It's great. I think it's awesome, but it was attempting to phish, you know, your username and password and the access key that you have. They have like triple or quadruple passwords. I won't call them factors, because they're at the end of the day just secrets that you have. But you know, they're after the same thing. They're trying to get into your password wallet, and I'm sure they're ultimately going to steal your access to your Bitcoin wallets or what have you. But anyway, I think this is something that we have to keep an eye on, because as time goes on, the ability to use really pedestrian attacks that we've been seeing in the past, like credential stuffing and whatnot, is going to be less effective. And so the bad guys are going to be looking for new ways. And so I suspect that we will probably see this in the context of businesses, if we're not already, pretty soon.
Yeah, agreed. And I think table stakes in this one is don't let your users install software, which I know frustrates people, but this is a great example. A very well-crafted phishing campaign or social engineering campaign that looks extremely legitimate, doesn't have the usual, hey, look for look for all these things to know if it's a bad guy. You just need to have folks who are a lot closer to the technology making decisions on what versions of the software to install. Not that they can also be fooled and victimized, but you really don't want non-technology people making those decisions. And it's just going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, that was I'll go back to ranting about my attempts to study for the CISM test. I'm going to paraphrase, right? And it's a simple and stupid example, but what is the most important control to avoid phishing attacks? And the answer was security awareness training. And perhaps at some point in history that was, but what I would love to see, and this is something I've talked about since I started this damn podcast almost 15 years ago, by the way, is that I really think we let ourselves off the hook. IT and security need to step up more. We have a responsibility, and whether that's making sure that people can't accidentally fall for this and install a remote access Trojan, and maybe that could be done by blocking installation or execution of unknown stuff, or maybe it's done through firewalls, or maybe it's done through your EDR agent, or there's a bunch of ways that you can get to the same end. But relying on people to constantly and every time act rationally, I think it's just it's not a winning strategy.
Yeah, I think you said
that's
it very
not
well.
A problem with people, right?
Right. I think you said it well, that we let ourselves off the hook. We shifted the blame to the victim.
Yes.
And those of us running the technology and owning the technology controls who have the ability to protect the victims now have gotten comfortable blaming the victims. They just weren't smart enough. They just weren't wise enough. They didn't go through the training enough. And you and I have ranted against that many, 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 many times on this show. We need to build our infrastructure so it can survive somebody being victimized by a social engineering attack.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's not to say that there's no value. Like I know that there are people here yelling at their whatever phone, Victrola, whatever, saying, well, but like if you can cut down on the number of potential attacks by having people just not click on it, that's good. And I agree. But that's not the same as, getting it down to zero. Like it's not, right?
When the cost of failure could be very high.
Right. Exactly. So anyway, something to think about. Not the last story, but the next story for today comes from Microsoft's security blog. And the title here is Extortion and Ransomware Drive Over Half of Cyber Attacks. I thought this was a couple of interesting data points to talk about. They start off by saying that 80% of attacks seen in the last year were attempting to steal data. And I suppose that's in contrast to like just destructive attacks, DDoS attacks, or what have you. So 80% were intended to steal data. 52% were focused on financial gain. They were perpetrated for the purposes of financial gain, specifically extortion or ransomware. And then they say that things like espionage only made up 4% of their attacks. Now, this was an interesting discussion because you sent this to me, and it was in the context of a Slashdot article, and those tend to like smash up a bunch of different things together. And one of the comments in there was, well, like, how do you know what the denominator is? How do you know that it was only 4%? Like, and it's a good question. It's a fair question, but I'll just answer that because I know, right, that it's 4% of what they've detected.
Sure.
So
yeah,
there could be like 1 million of these that they haven't detected, and therefore it's not actually 4%, but it's of what they've detected, just to answer the question.
Yeah, and it's very hard to answer the question, well, how do they know what they haven't detected? If we knew, we would detect it. I mean, you could make estimates, and there's probably scientific methodologies around that, but that's a tough thing to answer.
Right. There's a couple of other interesting points later in the article. One is that critical services are prime targets with the real world impact. So they point out that the bad guys are focusing on critical public services. And a lot of people say, well, like, why are hospitals and other medical facilities such hot targets for ransomware gangs, and to some extent local governments too? And they point out here that they have a lot of sensitive information, and they typically have limited budgets, and that often leads to, as they describe, outdated software, which in turn I think means that they are going to be more susceptible to being a target. And then later, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, like, they have, because of their perhaps less lack of sophistication through budgetary constraints and the fact that they provide critical services, like, they have a high incentive to pay the ransom so they can get back up and running.
Yeah, their tolerance for downtime is very, very low.
Let's see, there's some stuff on nation states, which I don't find super informative.
I did have one note. So they talk about China and its, industrial espionage. I have no affiliation. We're not paid to say this, but one interesting podcast I listened to that's not super technical. It's meant for the common non-security person, but it's called To Catch a Thief. And it's a little old at this point, but it really covers, I think, quite well China's push for industrial espionage via cyber warfare. And it sums it up very well, and it makes it very approachable. I think for very technical people who pretty much, is our audience, it may be a little too basic at times, but it paints the picture well. And it's also a great one if you want to try to educate some somewhat less technical folks about the threat coming out of China, especially around industrial espionage. It's pretty interesting. So anyway, it's called To Catch a Thief. It's worth listening to. I just want to kind of unsolicited plug for them.
Awesome. Cool. It's not said in this article that certainly there are instances where nation state attackers go after commercial infrastructure. It's not unprecedented, in any way. But I think what is a lot more problematic in my experience is that the TTPs, the methodologies that these nation states create, are often, eventually they're identified by security firms, right? They're found, and then you have a Mandiant reporter, some enterprising security company just kind of decomposes what happened, and other adversaries, much more commodity adversaries, are paying attention. Like, they're using that information on how to improve their own attacks. And so there's this downstream capability, or downstream consumers, I guess is a better way to say it, of what is being created by these uber sophisticated, well-resourced actors here. That's one of the big concerns I have with this. And it's not, by the way, I'm not saying that the security companies shouldn't write about those attacks. What I'm saying is that, when they're disclosed publicly, it's not just us on the defense side that is analyzing those to figure out what we can learn. It's also the other bad guys.
True enough.
The other point that I wanted to talk about, kind of pretty close to the bottom of the article, was adversaries aren't breaking in; they're signing in. And they point out that amid the growing this is a quote, amid the growing sophistication of cyber threats, one statistic stands out more than 97% of identity attacks are password attacks. And so they say in the first half of 2025 alone, identity-based attacks surged by 32%. And I think it's kind of a sign of the times. We are at a point where a lot of organizations have EDRs, and they have their next gen firewalls, and we're getting increasingly well instrumented. And so the bad guys, the way I would describe it, is they're focusing on blending in as appearing to be a legitimate user, right? They're logging in with legitimate credentials, and whether that's like logging in to Snowflake or to Salesforce or what have you, using legitimate credentials to take away data that credential has valid access to get to. And again, this is just a sign of the times of where we're at in the maturity cycle. So I'm not surprised. I think what is perhaps frustrating is that the implication here is 97% of these attacks are successful because the password is what failed. Whether that's through, as they point out, through password use through breaches, but they also point out the prevalence of info stealers. And so kind of very garden variety malware that people get on their computer. Sometimes it can be a browser plugin, lots of different ways this can manifest itself, but it's kind of sitting there stealing credentials that your users are entering. And look, this is something like, even in the banal world of Mastodon, we have this problem where, there's a couple million people in the Fediverse, and some number of them have fallen victim to info stealers, and their passwords have been stolen, and they're being used by bad actors to perpetrate spam attacks and other phishing attacks. Like they're trying to lure people into malicious sites that would allow them to conduct other types of attacks, like installing access Trojans on their workstations and stuff. What they don't understand, though, is that like most of the people in the Fediverse are starving artists, and like me, they don't have a lot of money.
Why did you become an artist?
I take pictures. Makes me an artist.
The only thing I'm concerned about with this stat is, are they lumping in attempts with successes? And so it's really easy to run a big brute force, leaked password dump, password slam sort of that could just jack up stats through the roof of, somebody tried to run 28,000 passwords against us. None worked, but those could be password attacks. That's my only concern on this stat. Right.
So it's possible. I'm not going to discount the possibility there. I don't know how they counted. The use of the word attacks does lead you to think that, well, maybe it's not successful right. Attacks. So I don't know. All I can say is that just again, watching the simple environment of Mastodon, this is a huge problem. Like there's lots of instances of people's passwords being stolen and reused, and like it's a low value. I'm not going to say it's no value, right? Because there's certainly value, but it's a low value thing relative to stealing your crypto wallet or what have you. Like there's typically not a lot of sensitive data there. So anyway, the last story for today comes from The Guardian, and this is something very different, but I thought it was worthwhile. It's something you sent me, and I thought definitely worth talking about. So this is a story about the CISO of SolarWinds, and the title is, I lost 25 pounds in 20 days. What it's like to be on the front line of a global cyber attack. So Tim Brown is the person's name. He was and as far as I know, still is the CISO of SolarWinds when the breach, their big breach came to light, and I think he's stayed there now. This article is really pointing out the incredible stress that we, in especially security leadership, are put under in times of a breach. Now, you could say, well, he clearly brought it on himself. It's a human element. I'm not specifically talking about this particular breach. I want to talk about the general case of what we go through in breaches. Like, I have no hair. I have, I'm still kind of trying to get my heart back into shape after 14 years of just constant breach hell. So I appreciate this. And I think it's something we don't talk a lot about. We certainly talk about like burnout in the context of cybersecurity. And I'm not trying to poo-poo that at all. I think that is at a different level than what we're talking about here. Like, this is an acute problem when you are in this situation. And as they talk about in this article, Tim Brown had a heart attack. And now, was it a direct result of the breach? I don't know, but I'm sure it didn't help. I can tell you, having been through a lot, I mean, nothing to the scale of SolarWinds, certainly. But, I've been through a bunch. It is really hard on your body. It's hard on your mind. It's hard on your body. So I think it's important for us to appreciate this. And I don't know what the answer is. Tim says he's now advocating for companies to provide psychiatric support in instances of a breach, and maybe that's the way to go. But I think, broadly speaking, when we and our teams go through a breach, we all want to be heroes, and there's an expectation that we're, by our businesses, that we are going to do what's required. But the reality is, we're humans. Like, we can't work for weeks on end without breaks. And especially in emotionally and intellectually constantly taxing jobs. By the way, all the while, you're still having to do what you're doing before. Like, that stuff doesn't stop.
Yeah, other industries have figured out that there is a value diminishing returns for how long you push somebody. Fatigue is a real problem, and it erodes performance and mental faculties and capabilities, which is dangerous, obviously. I don't think we as an industry have much sympathy for that. I think executives expect, like you said, 24/7 work until the problem's solved, which it's not productive, but it is the just do something until it's fixed. We have no choice mentality of executives in many of these cases. And I think it comes from being inexperienced and naive about the actual effects, because most companies don't have a major breach very often. And there's a bit of panic there, and there's a bit of whatever it takes. And I think it can absolutely burn staff to the ground who may already feel demoralized because maybe they were trying to avoid this and they weren't listened to begin with. And now they've got to clean up the mess because leadership wouldn't listen to them. So I don't know. I obviously have my own experiences around this, and I do think it's something that, if I'm being brutally honest, I think a lot of executives just don't care about the mental health of their security teams in a breach.
No, I would go so far as to say I don't think they care that much when there isn't a breach, which is why I say, I think the average executive is a sociopath. I don't, especially at larger companies, I'm not sure that you can be a successful senior executive without being a sociopath. And I don't say that tongue in cheek. I mean, I'm very serious about it. I was one. I was there and saw it. So I think that plays into it. I don't think that obviously there's always exceptions, right? But I think in general, the people who are in those positions are there because they kind of plow through whatever is standing in their way. And this is just another thing standing in their way. And they don't have a lot of sympathy because you're just a resource, you're a means to an end. But the reality is, again, something we don't talk enough about. People make bad decisions when they have been awake for too long, when they're under too much stress. It is just a thing. And so it's important for us to factor that in. And it's probably worth, I'm not here saying I have this all figured out, but what I'm saying is this is probably something worth thinking about in peacetime and not waiting until you have a breach.
Oh, yeah. Normally, what I like to say is 90% of what happens in a breach, the outcome of the breach is determined by what you did before the breach. So you've got to figure this out when you're not in the middle of the crisis. Of course, the problem is you may have a well-architected, well-thought-out, well-designed breach response plan and incident response plan that is quickly and efficiently ignored by executive leadership the minute they feel they need to.
Which is almost every time.
Right. So that is an interesting problem, side problem to solve. You know what will solve this though is just give incident response over to AI. It'll take care of it, and we can just go to bed.
That's true. There'll be agentic incident responders now.
And then the agentic executive panic bot can deal with the AI agentic incident response bot, and they can panic together while the rest of us get some sleep. It's a good article and it's worth reading. Whatever you think about SolarWinds, this is worth reading because it could happen to any of us. I mean, not the specific set of facts, but like any of us could be involved in responding to a major breach in our organization, and so it's worth seeing what they went through. In this particular point, he's talking about how when in their breach, they had to move from their email system and their instant message system, which they knew was compromised, to using Proton Mail and Signal for communications. But one of the things I thought that was most interesting, because I felt this a lot, is related to communications and how everybody wants to talk to you. And he's talking about how, like, in the media wants to talk to you. Like, they don't want a statement. They want to talk to you. And I find that, by the way, is true even inside the company. And so I don't know that enough companies, especially the ones that haven't been through a big breach, fully appreciate exactly how much communication there is and how distracting it can be. And so if I had to give you some wisdom on, kind of handling breaches, it's figuring out how to keep the senior executives kind of firewalled off from the people who are responding to the incident. And I know that's going to perhaps sound, I don't know, dumb. No, if customers are demanding to talk to an executive, like a CISO, now they become the bottleneck if they're also running the incident response. And so you've got to have somebody who isn't stuck in all these customer comm situations, talking to customers, which is a huge, huge time suck. Also trying to do tactical and technical incident response. And so you've got to divide and conquer. And I don't think a lot of companies recognize that. And I don't think a lot of executives recognize that. And I don't think they recognize it in the moment or after, because they're the throat to choke. So they have to do X, Y, Z. But in an attempt to help, they're making it worse.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say don't underestimate in your incident response plans how much effort you have to put into north-south communications in the business, and how distracting that can be. Like, I would go so far as to say, like, you need somebody whose job is to effectively be on a phone, a conference call with executives, keeping them informed and entertaining their inane ideas on what you should be doing.
I mean, there's another aspect of this that I've seen, which is the comms team isn't technical enough and needs senior technical people to help them vet and craft communications they're sending. There's just a lot of very unexpected competing demands for senior technical leadership time in the middle of an incident.
Yes.
You got to sort that out.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't see that talked about much. I think that there's a lot that we can learn from this. And I do think that most companies learn this on their own the hard way. And so I think this is something worth talking about. And hopefully this discussion got your gears turning and you can take it back and maybe make your company a little bit better. So there you have it. That is the show for today. Anything else that you wanted to cover on that one? But I cut you off.
No, I think we beat that one successfully into the ground.
All right, good deal. All right, thank you again to our Patreon sponsors. Definitely appreciate you. Thank you to our YouTube followers. We're not going to get to the Joe Rogan bucks without you. So Definitely appreciate that. You can find links to the stories we talked about on our website at defensivesecurity.org. Just look for episode 327. In the meantime, where can people find you if they want to badger you?
I am on X and your amazing Mastodon instance, infosec.exchange, with the same handle on both, Lerg, L-E-R-G.
Awesome. And I am at Jerry at infosec.exchange. And don't try to get me on LinkedIn because that is just a hellscape lately. So anyway.
'Tis true. 'Tis true.
I love you all. I hope you have a great week. And we'll talk again next time.
Thanks. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.